Hi, welcome to San Francisco Weekly News. I'm Diane Smith. I have today our guest is Chesa Boudin. Chesa Boudin, who is our candidate for district attorney in San Francisco. Welcome to the show, Chesa.
Thank you so much for having me, Diane. It's good to be here. It's early morning. We're both getting started.
That's right. We're both getting started.
Yeah.
So, moving right along, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well,
yeah.
when I was born, my parents, I was their first child. And when I was 14 months old, my parents left me at the babysitter, and they never came back to get me.
Really?
While I was at the babysitter that day, they participated in an armed robbery, and it tragically left 3 men dead. My parents weren't armed; they didn't personally hurt anybody, but they were driving the getaway car, and they ended up getting arrested. My mother ultimately served 22 years in prison. My father is still incarcerated today, and he may never get out. He's now served over 38 years in prison, and the result for me, of course, other families were totally destroyed. I mean, the families of the men who were killed,
Right.
they never got to see or touch their fathers or husbands again.
Right.
For me as an infant, it meant that I didn't have parents. I ended up getting adopted by a new family that had 2 older brothers. My oldest brother was born over here by Alamo Square in San Francisco.
So you were in the foster care system?
It was through friends.
Okay.
I was lucky in that regard. But obviously, the trauma of having my parents arrested, of having that initial instability,
Wow.
and then of going through steel gates every time I wanted to see my parents, presented me with some real childhood challenges. It took me years to overcome. And eventually, I figured out how to focus my energy on more positive things. I made it to Yale College.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I won a Rhodes Scholarship, went to Oxford, did 2 master's degrees there.
Wow, when you put your mind to it.
That's right.
You were determined. What was your motivation to achieve it for such high levels of accomplishment?
I think I saw the failures of the criminal justice system. I saw the ways that so many of the people in prison with my parents didn't have education, didn't have opportunity. And when I was presented with opportunity, I wanted to take advantage of it. I mean, I had a very stark contrast between a relatively privileged upbringing as a white middle-class American in a stable family home. And then on the other hand, I'd spend weekends visiting my parents in prison. And I saw the challenges and the obstacles that so many of the families with loved ones behind bars were facing. When I had opportunities, I wanted to take advantage of them. I ended up at Yale Law School. I worked for 2 federal judges here in California.
Yes.
And I decided to become a public defender to fight for equal justice, even for people too poor to pay for their own lawyer.
Now, you decided to fight for people that are too poor to pay for their own lawyer.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what we do every day as public defenders. People get arrested. They're entitled to a quality legal representation. And the San Francisco Public Defender is one of the best in the country. I've worked in that office. I've helped build it up. I've helped envision and launch new units in the office that have won awards, that have become models for other parts of the country and other public defenders' offices to follow. And one of the things I realized over years and years of fighting one case at a time is that the whole system is broken. It's the same thing I saw visiting my parents in prison.
Why do you say this? What's broken about the system? Not that I don't know, but
Sure.
But I don't know what you know.
You're right. Let me give you a couple concrete examples.
Yes, concrete.
So in California, we spend nearly 10% of our state budget on our Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, our prison system. And yet we know that people are not being rehabilitated.
Right.
About 2/3 of the people getting out of prison are going to be back in prison within a couple short years.
Right.
And so we need to do a better job of preventing crime and of healing it when it occurs. Most victims are not satisfied with lengthy punishments or with the treatment they receive in the criminal justice system. Many victims feel that they've been used as a piece of evidence rather than treated with dignity and respect.
Now, I just want to ask you more about that. Victims not being satisfied with lengthy sentencing. What would victims, based on your experience as a public defender now, you're now
Right.
one of San Francisco public defender.
Right.
And what has been your experience in working with victims? What would satisfy them? What are their feelings?
Well, most victims want to be heard. They want to be empowered. After
Okay.
being the victim of a crime, whether it's an auto burglary or a sexual assault, it's really important that we uplift and empower. And all too often, our criminal justice system does the opposite. I've met with victims who told me they were so ignored by the police or the district attorney or the courts that they actually ended up deciding to hire their own lawyer as a victim to make sure they had someone advocating for them.
Oh, my.
So one of my commitments as a candidate for district attorney, and I'm the only candidate in the race to have made this commitment, is that my staff will contact every victim of every crime within 48 hours of filing a new case. It's essential to give the victims a voice, to make sure they're being heard, and that we know what we can do to meet their needs and to inform them of their rights.
Great. So victims will be contacted by your office when you're elected
Correct.
district attorney within 48 hours of a crime.
Correct. And I'm going to go further than that. Okay. I'm going to give every single victim the right to participate in restorative justice if they choose to. Now, for those who aren't familiar, restorative justice is a principle that focuses on victim-centered healing instead of just punishing the perpetrator of the harm. So restorative justice, to give a simple example, if somebody spray paints my house, instead of just giving that person a criminal conviction and sending them to jail, we'd require that person to paint the house back to its original status.
Okay.
Heal the harm, allow the victim to drive that healing, identify what their needs are, and require the person who committed the crime to actually do the difficult work of being held accountable to fix the damage they've caused.
Great. And you're the only one that has made this. Well, this is why we have you on the show. I knew I was going to find out even more. Yeah. Everything that I've read has been very encouraging. As a native San Franciscan, I have experienced the broken system through relatives, friends, relatives. And most recently, there was an Asian lady, a Chinese senior citizen who was attacked. She was a victim of a violent crime. And I would want, and most of us, it would make sense that the serious crime should be persecuted to the full extent. They said she had to wait more than 3 hours for a response.
We've had a whole series of really unacceptable law enforcement responses to violent
one more
crimes.
thing. I must interrupt so you can include this in your answer. And there's no one, we don't have enough people that are bilingual.
Right.
When we talk about the Chinese languages, there's so many dialects. So the Chinese that I work with, one speaks, there's so different dialects.
Right, Mandarin and Cantonese.
Right, and then you have simplified, then it depends on the province, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Africa's the same way, but I don't know anything about it yet.
Right.
But the different languages and different dialects and so forth. So I'm very concerned, particularly when I see older people of any that are unable to communicate.
Right.
They're concerned.
Right. So let me talk about a couple things your questions raises. I mean, first of all, language access is a critical issue. San Francisco has about 20% of the population that does not speak English fluently, limited English proficiency. Chinese dialects are one of the main language groups. Spanish is another big one.
Yes.
Of course, Tagalog and Russian and Arabic and other languages as well. We need to ensure that everybody in San Francisco, no matter where they were born, no matter what color their skin is, and no matter what language they speak, has access to equal justice. And that means if you're the victim of a robbery, as the person in the Good Orchard Bakery case was, and you don't speak English, but you call 911 begging for help, you've been injured, you've been violently robbed, you're lying on the ground bleeding, you need to have a response time that's the same as you or I would as an English speaker. And that is not happening today in San Francisco. I'm proud to say I published an op-ed in Chinese and in Spanish laying out my commitment to expand language access for everybody in San Francisco to make sure that we have staff in the district attorney's office that speak all of the languages and understand all of the cultures of San Francisco. Now, that's the first part of your question. The second is about violent crimes.
Yes.
Now, I want to make sure to touch on that as well. I'm the only candidate in this race to have laid out a detailed, specific plan for how we can prioritize prosecuting serious and violent crimes. Let me tell you what a bad job we're doing today.
Okay.
In San Francisco criminal courts, 2/3 of the cases that go all the way to jury trial, the most resource-intensive part of any criminal case, a jury trial where you bring in 12 members of the community, take a week or more off work to hear the evidence in a case. You have a judge and a prosecutor dedicate their entire time for a week or more to one case. 2/3 of the time, it's a misdemeanor. It's a case that
What?
by definition is a petty offense, a low-level offense. Now, of course, misdemeanors can be serious to the people involved.
I understand, but
But
how are we using our money and resources
Thank you.
for a misdemeanor when we have serious crime?
Thank you. And I'll tell you what
They're
else.
dragging old people in the streets.
Right.
They're grabbing all
Rape,
sorts
murder.
of atrocities. Right. Rape,
Right.
murder.
Right. And I'll tell you what else. San Francisco is the county in California where that number is the highest. Every other county in the state
What?
does less misdemeanors and more felonies than we do. Now, my priority as district attorney is to make sure that the cases where there's a real victim, a person who's been harmed,
Right.
and especially where they've been seriously harmed, where the crime is by definition serious or
Right.
by definition violent, by the law, those cases are the number one priority. And we have to
Right.
make sure that that is where we're allocating our resources. We got to put our money where our mouth is.
Right.
If the law says it's serious and violent, I'm going to prioritize it.
That's right. And I'm glad that I'm very glad to hear about your concern and the fact that you will do something to make sure that the people that speak only Spanish or people that are not bilingual have someone that is bilingual to help them. We have a large Latino community. And this is, I think, is this part of Hispanic Heritage Month?
That's a good
Latino
question. I should
Heritage
know
Month?
that because I lived in Latin America for a long time.
You did? Oh,
Yeah,
yes, you
and
did.
my fiance is half Chilean. So I speak Spanish at home with her. She speaks Swahili because she's also half Kenyan.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
she speaks a lot of languages, and she's an immigrant to this country. She came
Yeah.
to San Francisco to do her doctorate at UCSF.
Uh-huh.
And so the issues that the immigrant population face and that non-English speakers face are really close to home for us.
Yes.
I've lived abroad myself,
Yes.
often in countries where I didn't speak the language.
Yes.
And it's a challenge to be in a community where you're not fluent in their language. And if you're a victim of crime, you need to be able to access help and services.
That is so true. And, I wanted to just mention there's a Candlestick Point Park. You're probably familiar
I
with
am.
it, okay? And I walk that park regularly. There used to be such vibrancy and a large Latino presence there. And ever since ICE and all of this horrible invasion and I don't have the words right now, but all the illegal and inhumane treatment
By the Trump administration, yeah.
by the Trump administration, the Dump administration.
There you go.
There's people aren't out. The vibrancy
Right.
is gone. It's dry. If people cannot communicate, they can't even fight for themselves. So I have this sense that people are inside and they're afraid to call anyone.
Yeah.
Because if you don't speak their language, they're not going to call.
Right. And I'll tell you, the Trump administration has made it very clear that it is going to continue to use racist, nativist rhetoric to up the ante, to use immigration as a wedge to divide this country and to persecute and scapegoat immigrant communities. We've seen that for years now, and it's going to continue. And it's all the more important in this era of racism from the White House that San Francisco have local elected officials with a track record and a clear commitment and plan for pushing back with every resource we have against that racism, against that nativism, and against Trump. Let me tell you why I'm the right person for that job on this issue. I sued ICE when I was in law school, and I won. For illegally arresting immigrants. Thank you. Yeah. It was exciting. It was a fun thing to be part of as a law student.
Yes.
And when I came to San Francisco after law school, one of my first projects at the public defender was to persuade the sheriff to stop cooperating with ICE. And that was before we had passed our sanctuary city policy that prohibits that cooperation. And the next thing I did was to persuade Jeff Adachi, the head of the public defender, that we needed to start an immigration unit at the public defender's office. It's an amazing unit. It's exceeded even my wildest dreams for what it would accomplish, become an award-winning national model for how to integrate criminal and immigration legal services together.
Yes.
And I want to go further. As San Francisco's next district attorney,
Yes.
I'm the only candidate who has committed to creating an immigration unit in the district attorney's office. Now,
That is an excellent idea.
thank you.
I mean, I don't know why we don't have one.
Thank you.
But this is forward thinking.
Right. And I'll tell you what, state law requires that district attorneys consider immigration consequences when they offer a plea deal or request a sentence of someone who's not a citizen. But the district attorney's office today only has one lawyer who works part-time with
What?
any immigration expertise. How can they comply with state law?
Oh, they're out of compliance.
Yeah.
So rather than show up at the various meetings, what we will do is we will vote
Thank you.
November the 5th.
Thank you. Get out the vote November the 5th. And early voting has already begun.
I've already voted for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
Well, full
absolutely.
disclosure.
Yeah, well, full disclosure. And also part of my full disclosure is you can see now why I had no choice. We had no choice but to endorse Chesa Boudin for district attorney in San Francisco. We had no choice. Oh, and another reason is the elimination of cash bail. Please elaborate on that.
Oh, I would love
That
to talk
so
about
critical.
that. It really is. Thank you for asking about that. It's something I've worked on now for more than 5 years, and we've made tremendous progress, but the fight is not over. And for folks who aren't familiar, the way that the cash bail system works is basically as follows. If you're arrested and taken to jail, there is a list of charges, and next to that list of charges is a price tag, a dollar amount. So if you're arrested for robbery, $75,000. Now, if you have $75,000, you can buy your way out within minutes. Mm-hmm. You're out the door, back on the street. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how dangerous you are. If you don't have, right, so wealthy people who are dangerous are right back on the street.
Okay.
And if you don't have 75,000, you only have 7,500, you go to a bail bond agent. You pay them 10%, 7,500 in this case, and you're out on the street immediately. Now, you never get that money back. It's a non-refundable fee. It's the bail industry's profit, but you're back on the street. Mm-hmm. What happens if you don't have even that $7,500? Like a lot of folks, I mean, most folks don't have $7,500 lying around.
Right. Now, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a large population in jail that are simply there awaiting trial because they don't have the means to bail out.
That's exactly right. About 80% of the people in San Francisco County Jail are simply awaiting trial. They have not been convicted. Yep.
So our tax dollars are paying for a jail population of 80%. Are they still serving 3 meals a day, or is there one?
They are serving 3 meals a day. It's not very good food, but it still costs tax dollars $250 per day per inmate to be in the jail. Very expensive.
What? $250 a day per inmate. 80%. The number is staggering.
80% are awaiting trial, have not been convicted. So what it tells you, look, let's be clear. There are some people who are so dangerous that they should be in jail awaiting trial until we sort out the charges.
Absolutely.
But if you're putting a price tag on their freedom, if you're saying if you were wealthy you could get out, then it does two things. It undermines public safety by allowing wealthy people who are dangerous to go right back on the streets, and it discriminates against people who are poor. Mm-hmm. And so I filed lawsuits challenging this system, pushing the courts, the federal courts and the courts of appeals, to order our local officials in San Francisco to use a risk-based system instead of a wealth-based system.
Okay, so a risk-based system for bail means exactly what?
Well, basically what it means is instead of saying if you're rich, you buy your way out, doesn't matter how dangerous, it says, are you dangerous? And if so, are there conditions we can put on your freedom that would mitigate that danger? For example, a stay-away order from a particular corner. For example, no drugs or alcohol requirement with drug testing. For example, anger management classes.
Like it.
Right? Those kinds of things that are actually related to public safety and that are narrowly tailored to the particular challenges the individual may be facing. If we can impose those conditions, less restrictive, less expensive, consistent with the presumption of innocence, allow someone to keep their job, their housing, to keep custody of their kids, then we should do that. Now, if a judge decides that none of those conditions, no combination of those conditions are adequate to protect the public from someone, then that person should be detained in jail. They shouldn't be able to get out just because they're wealthy.
It's so simple.
It's so simple.
It's complicated.
Well, let me tell you something. I've been leading this fight for years.
This is wonderful news.
All of the other candidates in the race, as prosecutors, have used money bail to ensure that poor people can't get out while allowing dangerous, wealthy people to get out. As candidates, all of a sudden, everybody says they support the work I've been fighting for years.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
I know.
Well, that's how it works, right? They let you go out, take all the brunt, take the force of it, and do the work. I sincerely... Oh, also, we have a little more time. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to ask you about. You said that it's essential that state and local governments stand up to protect and include diverse communities. You did mention that earlier, and I'm pulling this from your statement. Could you just elaborate a little bit more?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think we all know that there's a tremendous amount of racism built into our criminal justice system. And it's not just the criminal justice system. Racism in this country has deep roots. You can trace them back to slavery and beyond. And we see it manifest to this day in housing policy, in education, in employment, and perhaps most of all in criminal justice. So I want to give a couple statistics that should be very troubling to us. San Francisco is about 4% African American, and yet the county jail is about 50% African American. We incarcerate African Americans in San Francisco at a higher rate than any other major city in the country. We should be troubled by that. That is not consistent with our progressive values, and we need to make serious changes at every step of the criminal justice system to reduce and mitigate those racial disparities. Now, my policies and my detailed platform for attacking racial disparities, it's on my website, and it's developed in partnership with community leaders, and it's won me the endorsement of people like John Legend, Sean King, Felicia Jones, Kat Brooks, the Harvey Milk Club, 5 members of the Board of Supervisors, and so many others who understand that we need to keep our community safe in a way that doesn't perpetuate racial bias, and who understand that we are safer when we're investing in education rather than incarceration.
Very good. Now, I noticed you mentioned you were also endorsed by the San Francisco Tenants Union.
Yep.
That's awesome. An endorsement from the San Francisco Tenants Unit. I'm a licensed real estate broker.
Okay.
So I understand very closely what that means because of rent control, the unaffordability, the lack of affordable housing, lack of low income, etc. The San Francisco Young Democrats endorsed you. Also, healthcare professionals endorsed you because of the you're advocating mental health treatment instead of jail.
Yes, I'd like to talk about that a little bit. I think it's one of the most important issues facing San Francisco today, and let me tell you why. We all see every day the mental health crisis playing out on our streets. We see people on Market Street, on Polk Street, in every part of this city who are either drug addicted, mentally ill, or both. In fact, 75% of the people who are taken to county jail by police are drug addicted, mentally ill, or both. And our response is not working. Today, the county jail is the #1 provider of mental health services. It's not humane, it's not cost effective, and it is not working to keep us safe. So we've got to do a better job. My commitment, my plan, is to treat mental illness before crimes are committed, instead of waiting for someone to commit a felony to get the treatment that they need in jail. And there's a number of ways we're going to do that. I'm proud to be have the support of Hillary Ronan and Matt Haney. They've introduced a plan that I'm supporting called Mental Health SF, which would guarantee access to mental health care for every single person in San Francisco, especially folks on the streets that we know need it the most. The other thing we need to do is make sure every arrest is an opportunity for triage, for intervention, and for providing people with the services that are going to transform their lives and move them away from crime. What does that mean? Well, right now, about half the people who are arrested and taken to county jail are not actually charged with a crime. We've got this opportunity where police arrest people, they bring them to jail. We could be doing triage. We could be pairing people up with case management, with services, to figure out how to make sure they don't get arrested again.
Right.
We're not doing that.
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say huge missed opportunity.
Huge missed opportunity while we have them in hand. Now, you keeping us safe. As a senior citizen, 67-year-old senior citizen.
You do not look 67 years old.
Yeah, but I feel like it.
You
sure?
Do
you want to see ID?
No, I trust you. I'll take your word for it.
But my feeling is different now as I navigate through my native city.
Right.
I feel a little vulnerable.
Right.
So I would take that and say I'm very conscious of the elderly.
Yeah.
And when I see the fear in elderly, particularly in our immigrant communities, with our new Americans, be they Spanish-speaking, Vietnamese, Chinese, wherever our immigrants are from, I see a level of fear because they can't communicate, but they do know safety. I know safety. When I'm walking somewhere, I know when it feels safe and when it doesn't.
Right.
So with that being said, you mentioned about keeping us safe, and We need a strong district attorney.
Yeah.
That's what we need. I needed people to meet you because you're very strong, you're very clear, but you're not. You're on point.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Thank
on
you.
point.
And
So you're going to keep us safe.
Absolutely.
As we conclude the show, please, in 1 minute, we have 1 minute left for you to just tell people what they need to know and how you're going to keep us safe and what we can expect after we elect you, Chesa Boudin, for district attorney.
Thank you. What you can expect is a district attorney's office that's transforming our approach to justice. So we are not simply punishing people after a crime has been committed when it's too late for the victims. What we're doing instead is focusing on preventing crime, on breaking the cycle of recidivism, on hiring, retaining, and promoting diverse staff that reflect our communities that we're serving, and on giving victims a leading role in how we respond to crime. We're going to have a victims first office. We're going to give victims a voice. We're going to heal the harm that crime causes. And we're going to drastically reduce crime by treating the root causes: drug addiction, mental illness, trauma, violence prevention. That's the approach we're going to take to working in partnership with public health officials, with community leaders, to ensure that we are being proactive about preventing crime, detecting crime, deterring crime, and giving victims a voice at every step of the way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I look forward to working with you.
I look forward to working with you, too. Anything that we can do, we will certainly do.
I look forward to coming back after the election. Maybe we can do my first interview on your show.
Oh, let's do that.
That would be lovely.
Let's do that. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Chesa Boudin for District Attorney in San Francisco. Chesa Boudin for District Attorney in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.